City of Stevens Point Finance Committee special meeting on the 2025 budget, recorded October 28, 2024.
I have 6 o'clock. We'll call the special meeting of the Finance Committee to order. Carrie, could you take the roll, please?
Christensen.
Here.
Morrow. Is he excused?
I haven't heard from him. I haven't.
I have not either, so if nobody's heard from him, that should be an absence.
Okay. Shuda.
Here.
Can
Keemer?
barely hear you, Dean.
Here.
There you go.
Keemer. Here. Roderick. Here.
Okay, we do have a quorum, so we'll proceed. Our only item on the agenda this evening will be a presentation on our 2025 operating budget. There will be no action taken tonight, so there'll just be a presentation, and after that presentation, we'll be able to adjourn. So, Corey, I will turn things over to you.
All righty, thank you. So first of all, before I get started, did want to thank Carrie for, this is the 12th budget that we've worked on together, so did want to thank you for all your hard work over the last 12 years on these budgets. Also wanted to thank Marcy Peterson from our team as well, who is new, but we threw her right into the process, even though it was going midstream, and she picked it up pretty fast. So want to thank Marcy for her work on this as well. Basically, the presentation tonight will be in 2 parts. We'll talk about the 2025 operating budget and an overview, and then we'll talk a little bit about looking to the future in terms of 2026 and sort of future budgets and, trying to stay ahead of things in that respect as well. So the first section of overview of the 2025 budget, I'd like to start with where we are in the process. So back in August, we did have initial budget discussions with the Finance Committee, to try to set some guidelines. And one of the things that we decided on was that we really wanted to try to hit that 3.3% cost of living adjustment that's based on inflation. And then we also talked about that it was too soon to tell whether we would have enough money to add new positions. So that was sort of our discussion back in August. Now is our initial budget presentation. And then after that, we have November 5th, Election Day. Well, we'll find out what happens with the fire department referendum. Right now, that's not in the budget yet. We're going to wait for the voters to decide, and then once the voters decide, if they decide yes, we'll add it to the budget, of course. And then we also have November Finance, which is a chance for the Finance Committee to make any changes and recommend a budget to the full council. And then our November council meeting is the final approval for the full capital budget, and then mid to late December is when tax bills arrive. Yes.
Corey, this might be a good time to mention that for the November finance, normally we meet on the second Monday. Because that falls on Veterans Day, we will now be meeting on Tuesday, the 12th.
Okay.
Same time.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. So we can go to the next slide. So decisions that have already been made, I already mentioned that we discussed that in August, hitting that 3.3%, that was really important. So I'm going to the next slide. So budget highlights. As usual, we budgeted for the continuity of services. We continued funding for existing programs and positions. There aren't any major or significant reductions to any department or to any program. Cost increases had a significant impact, as they always do, and some of them are outside of our control. We had increases to pension contribution rates, police and fire wage increases. Those are negotiated with the respective unions. So that's something that we don't have complete control over. It's a negotiation between the two parties. And we also had health insurance increases that affected the budget. Others based on a critical need. The wage increases outside police and fire, probably one of our biggest discretionary decisions that we make with the budget. And then, I think our big announcement for this budget is the addition of 1 police officer position, which is something that we've been wanting to do for quite some time. And finally, we were able to get there this year, so that certainly is a big accomplishment to be able to add that. And that's an implementation of an overall staffing plan that was created in 2018, Mayor.
And I just wanted to point out too, Corey, that we didn't even know if we were going to be able to fund that additional position until about a week and a half ago.
Yes. Yeah, so it was somewhat late in the budget process that we were finally able to, really figure out that we figure out a way to fund that position. Luckily, revenues increased along with expenses. We had rollover of levy capacity from last year, which was a pretty smart move, definitely helped us this year. We had some increases in some state aid programs. Doesn't always happen. State aid programs can go either way. So they can go, up 6 figures, down 6 figures. It just depends on the year. And then we also have our Marshfield Clinic payment in lieu of taxes for $190,000. That also really helped with this budget as well. Something to keep in mind is that that's not the type of thing that we'll have every year in terms of an additional $190,000 in revenue being added to the budget. So a note about making numbers understandable. The new standard is to round with enthusiasm rather than getting everything down to the dollar, to just round it to make it a little bit easier for people to comprehend. So most of these numbers are rounded to the nearest thousand. Go on to the budget summary page. Couple of unique things. This gives you a general overview of the budget and changes in departments and changes in tax levy. One of the things to note, sometimes you'll see certain departments increasing more than others, and a lot of times that has to do with factors that are outside of our control, such as turnover. In general, if you have turnover, you have that can have a depressing effect on the budget amounts, just because you have people who left and they were making a higher salary, and you bring new people in at a lower salary. So sometimes people look at this, well, why did this department increase more than that one? A lot of times it can be changes like that. It can be changes in health insurance enrollment that also can have that impact. And then the other unique thing that we had that makes this look a little bit different this year is we had the personal property buyout, where basically a whole class of property became tax exempt, and then we got an aid payment instead of having that tax base. And then our levy limit also got reduced so that it wouldn't result in a tax increase to the general public. So because of that, it looks like our general operational levy is actually going down, but that's because of that personal property buyout and how that flowed through. So we can go to the next slide.
Just wanted to point out that Alder Morrow is present now.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, welcome. And we can go on to the next slide. I think I covered all that already. So the personal property buyout. What is personal property? Basically, it's contents inside a building. It only applies to businesses. And like I just explained, the state decided to exempt personal property, provide an additional aid payment to avoid a tax increase. And then if we go to the next slide, this is the personal property levy limit calculation. So if you wanted to see exactly how this works, to visualize it, you can see our net new construction. You can see our net new construction total adjustment was about $424,000, and then we got about $428,000 in personal property aid. So that's why our allowable levy is actually less than it was last year. Even though our allowable levy is less, that doesn't mean that you're going to see a tax decrease, because remember that we've got a similar amount of levy spread over a smaller tax base, with a class of property becoming completely tax exempt now. So usually I like to go through the budget sources and uses of available funds. So the sources of funds, our big one is always net new construction. That makes a big difference, 1.95% this year, $253,000. I already talked a little bit about the increased pilot for the Marshfield Clinic, $190,000. We have our net new construction that we rolled over from last year. That's $171,000. We have increased transportation aid, increased municipal services payment for the services that we provide to the university, increased shared revenue, increased interest revenue. We had a police department budget adjustment to help fund the new officer. And then we also had increased connecting highway aid. And I do have slides to go into these all in more detail. So first of all, I'd like to review sort of our history of levy limits and sort of where we've been in recent years. So this is 6 years of history. You can see 1.95%. It's not the highest that we've had. It's also not the lowest that we've had. It's somewhere in the middle. Ideally, I'd like to see more, 2.5% or 3%, which we've been able to hit in some years in the past. But, that just is a little bit more of a challenge, and it really depends on if you have one or two really big, really sizable projects to really bump up that number. As far as the contributors, so we had a total of $46 million in net new construction. All residential construction was only $5.5 million. So as usual, commercial construction really is what makes it for the city for that net new construction number. And usually it's those bigger projects. So you can see we've got Corda, which is the former Walmart on Highway 10, was about $8 million. And that's for that entire site in terms of all the construction that's been going on there. The Grove, the former convent, about $6.8 million. Northside Yard, they completed their third building, $6.7 million. The Hilton Home to Suites, $3.7 million. The Banter Apartments on North Division Street, about $3.3 million. And then Steel King did some renovations for $1.9 million. And then you have other commercial construction for about $10.5 million. So and then this pie chart just kind of helps you visualize that, so you can see how much, and this is pretty typical, that it's really your larger projects that drive that net new construction. And some years you'll see one project take up half of that pie chart, which typically are your higher years for net new construction. So payment in lieu of taxes for the Marshfield Clinic. Basically, Marshfield Clinic changed to tax-exempt hospital use, agreed to make a pilot payment instead. And I did want to note, and we talked about this in August as well, it's somewhat risky to include this in the operating budget in terms of operating revenue that we rely on, just because if they ever would discontinue this hospital use, then that money goes away. And then we're out $190,000 that we'd have to find somewhere else in the budget. So it was sort of a necessity to make some of the things work in this budget. But I did want to point that out, that there is some risk involved there. Also, general transportation aid went up $126,000. That's an aid program from the state that's a reimbursement for past transportation spending, and basically the source of this revenue is money that we're already sort of paying in when we purchase gas or when we register our vehicles. That goes into the transportation fund that the state has. They do send some of that money back down to the local municipalities. The calculation is based on a rolling 6-year average of transportation spending, ranges from about 15 to 17% reimbursement. So basically everything that we spend on transportation, you can figure roughly a 15% reimbursement that we get for that. And the reason why the aid payment is going up, a couple of reasons, but the main one is that we are spending more on roads than we did 6 years ago. So that's something that I know we've talked about, that over the past 5 or 6 years, we've actually doubled the spending on roads. So now you can see as we're spending more money, we're grabbing a larger share of that overall pie that's available. So that also suggests that we've been growing our spending faster than other communities have, which I think is important. I think that we've been fairly focused on the future, and even though we're not where we need to be with transportation spending, we've certainly made a lot of progress in that area. And then the other thing that I would note is that, my office is also really focused on making sure that we capture and report all transportation-related expenses, which is also important, making sure that when we do our state report, we've got all those transportation expenses on there, they're classified correctly, and even going so far as to say, okay, something like liability insurance, you could report that as a general government expense, or you could break it up with all the different departments and say, no, this is actually partially a transportation expense, because part of what we're insuring is those operations that support the transportation network. So, history of general transportation aid, you can see this is actually a state aid program that has increased fairly significantly, and basically this is just based on our continual efforts to spend more money on transportation. Also, we have the municipal services payment. This is an aid payment from the state. Went up $108,000. This one has been very volatile. It'll go up or down $100,000 in a year. So, which it's nice that it went up this year. We've also had years where it's gone down $100,000, and those have been some more difficult years. But basically, it's an aid payment from the state for providing police and fire services to state-owned facilities, which is primarily UWSP. Comes from the state budget, not the UWSP budget. The state has a specific line item just for making this municipal services payment for providing services to state-owned facilities. It is adjusted for the fact that the UWSP has its own police force, and then it's prorated based on the total amount of money available, which this year they gave us 37.6% of what they actually owe us under the program. So I always kind of chuckle when I get their notice because, you know, first they say they're just paying for police and fire, they're not paying for any other services, and then we're going to pay you a percentage. I always think, you know, I'd love to pay my property taxes like that, to first choose what services I want to pay for and then give you a percentage. But, you know, that's the state and they make the rules and that's what they can do. This is a graph of how the municipal services payment has changed over time. You can see it used to be over $800,000. Now, you know, it's dropped to under $400,000 in the past, and now we're settling just above $500,000 for that aid program. So certainly happy to see the increase, but the overall trend on that program has been down, unfortunately. Also, we have some increased shared revenue, which is something that, you know, shared revenue had traditionally just been froze until last year. But the 2023 shared revenue bill now provides that it will increase as the same percentage as statewide sales tax collections. We're looking at an increase of 2.3% in our shared revenue. So wasn't quite as much as we were hoping for, but, you know, we'll take it. We're certainly not going to complain about that. And I also wanted to mention that, you know, that bill, the shared revenue bill was great, but we also have higher expectations as well since we do have maintenance of effort requirements now for police and fire. So while we get a little bit more money, we also have new requirements and new hoops to jump through. And then investment interest revenue did increase again. We're currently in a high interest rate environment, but it has started to decline some. The Federal Reserve did cut the rate by 0.5% earlier this year. So, you know, there is some risk with relying too heavily on interest revenue, but the backbone of our investment structure is now a 5-year certificate of deposit ladder, so that we have basically 1/5 maturing every year over the course of 5 years. So because we have those maturities spread out, it provides some of the stability that we need in budgeting, where if interest rates continue to go down, or if they, you know, if the economy goes south, interest rates could go down significantly. If that happens, what will happen is the interest income will go down kind of in steps over the course of 5 years, rather than going down, you know, all in 1 year. The other big reminder with interest revenue is, since we are becoming more reliant on it, we also need to preserve our fund balance to make sure that we continue to have money to invest to earn that interest revenue. So this is a graph that shows a 20-year history of interest revenue. So you can see the $850,000 in interest revenue is quite high compared to what we've historically been able to budget for interest revenue. So certainly that's definitely a positive. And then connecting highway aid, this is an aid program for maintaining state highways that go through the city, mainly Highway 66, which is the old Highway 10, so basically the Main and Clark Street corridor. Funding had stagnated for years while the cost of maintaining roads has gone up, and the state finally recognized this and increased funding for the program in the 2023 to 2025 biennial budget. The state has a 2-year budget that they use. So Now, that's where all the money came from. Now we'll go into the uses of available funds. So again, we have the salary and pay plan, cost of living adjustment, the 3.3%, that ended up being about $280,000. We've got fire union wage increases, $146,000. Now, one of the things that I want to note with the fire union wage increase is that that's not just their overall across-the-board increase, but what we also had is we had a lot of turnover in the fire department a few years ago, and which actually lowered the fire department budget down because you had people starting at lower salary steps. And then what happened is you have those people now who are gaining seniority moving through those steps, so that created kind of a cost spike for the fire union. We also have the new police officer for $108,000. Health insurance increase as well as enrollment changes, $105,000. Salary pay plan steps, $81,000. Reduced PD police department citation revenue, $45,000. Police union wage increase, $44,000. And with the police union, we had sort of the opposite of what happened with fire, where basically we had some turnover in the police department that suppressed the wages overall in the police department. So that's why you see that number being a little bit lower. You have transit and airport increase of $34,000. I'm not going to read the rest of them to you because we have other slides that do cover these. But basically getting into the pay plan adjustment history. So you can see 3.3%. It is lower than last year. Last year was 6.26%. But remember that inflation is also lower than last year. So it does work itself out. And I do expect that for the 2026 budget, it'll probably be, my guess is somewhere between 2.5% and 3%. I expect inflation to continue to step down a little bit over time here, but that's just my best guess. We'll see what actually happens. The 2025 minimum wage rate for full-time regular employees, $24.47 an hour, or $898 a year. So I think that's a significant milestone that basically if you're a regular full-time employee with the city, you're starting at least $50,000 now with the city. So fire department union wage increases, I already kind of explained the turnover that happened several years ago, and now people moving back through those steps, resulting in sort of a bounce back of costs. We have the new police officer for $108,000. That was part of a citywide staffing plan adopted in 2018, called for adding 5 more police officers. 2 of the 5 were added in 2020. We had a pretty good budget in 2020. We're able to add a number of positions citywide. So this is now the 3rd added under the plan. So basically, we're 3 out of the 5. We've got 2 to go, and not sure what future budgets hold, but that's kind of where we're at. Wanted to provide just a breakdown of the cost calculations. I know a lot of people sometimes will hear, oh, you're paying a police officer $108,000. Well, that's not actually the case. The starting salary would actually be $64,000, but you have the other fringe benefits, especially the health insurance, pension contributions, Social Security, that bring that total number up to the 6-figure level. Wanted to remind you that we do have maintenance of effort requirements for the police department, so we do need to think about this as a long-term commitment, because basically with the maintenance of effort requirements makes it very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult to reduce staffing in either police or fire. So just did want to point that out, that, as we're looking at adding this police officer, it is a long-term commitment. The penalty for failing to meet the maintenance of effort requirements is 15% of the shared revenue, currently $653,000. So it certainly isn't something that we want to mess with. So health insurance premium increases. We did an 8% across the board increase to premiums. It is our first increase in 2 years, so figure 4% per year, so which isn't too bad. It should have actually cost $217,000, but it was partially offset by changes in enrollment levels, so that's why the total increase in health insurance premiums is only the $105,000. Salary pay plan steps, $81,000. Basically, there's two components to a raise. We have our cost of living adjustment that raises the entire health plan, but then we also have employees who move through steps on the plan based on seniority and based on acceptable performance. So when somebody leaves, then that position starts back at step one, and that's a savings. And basically what that does is that funds everyone else's progression. As a whole, this year, the cost of step progression exceeded the savings from turnover. So basically, we had more people making their steps than we had in turnover. So that's why you see that extra $81,000 for people making their salary steps. Reduced police department citation revenue. Basically, revenues declined in 2020 due to COVID. We haven't adjusted the revenue projections significantly because we always thought that they would bounce back up. You know, we're getting out of COVID, where, you know, there was always a light at the end of the tunnel. But, you know, come to the realization that most COVID-related revenues have recovered. We're now at our new normal with COVID, and this one simply didn't come back. So this is a graph of the police department citation revenue history, and you can see that it did decline in 2020 and then just kind of stayed pretty stable from there. So police department union wage increases. These actually should have increased to $134,000, but we had that savings from turnover that ended up being just $44,000, so we saved approximately $90,000. With turnover, this was also one of the main departments where we saved on health insurance enrollment changes. Those two things do tend to go together, that you have people who leave and maybe they're on the family plan or employee plus spouse, and you know, you hire people who are newer, and a lot of times they have a different coverage status when they come on board with us. But of course, those expenses bounce back just like the rest of them, where as people get older, they get married, they have kids, and now you're going to employee plus spouse or, you know, the family plan. So just remember that those expenses, we're saving now on that, but those expenses do bounce back. And when we have savings like that, one of the things that I want to be very clear about is that what that does is it increases the extra costs of seniority advances elsewhere in the city, which this year were the fire employees and general employees. I want to be very clear that this did not fund the new police officer position, just because I know a lot of times one of the most frequent questions I get from department heads when they have turnover is, well, can I spend that money now? And I have to tell them, no, you know, you can't spend that money because we rely on that to fund everyone else's progression through, you know, seniority. Transit and airport, both set up as enterprise fund but rely on an annual subsidy from the city. They do need inflationary adjustments, so we added 6% to transit this year because they did have some, they did have a new union contract, which we tried to bring the transit employees more in line with their comparables, so they had some cost pressures from that. So that's why it's 6% for transit, and then 3.3% for airport. Okay, the next one, reduced permit revenue. So we had $20,000 in reduced permit revenue. As you can see, that used to be a little bit higher, and then it's come down a little bit from, you know, it's high in 2019 and 2020. So have to budget that one a little bit more conservatively. So we reduced the permit revenue line item by $20,000. And then we also reduced special charge revenue. This would be the revenues that primarily the neighborhood improvement coordinator would, you know, give people a charge for code violations in terms of property maintenance violations. So that one again, looked like it was budgeted a little bit too high, so we brought that down. And then the uses under $30,000, I didn't want to make specific slides for all of these because my presentation started to get a little bit long, but I did want to just list them all here for you, and I can briefly describe them. We had $28,000 increase in software license fees, $27,000 increased police department pension contributions. We had the elected salary increases for $23,000. Thank you. We had the reduced utility pilot for $20,000. Basically what that is the water utility makes a payment in lieu of taxes to the city for the city providing services to the water utility's assets, because they do have assets, and if they were a tax-paying entity, they'd be paying taxes on them. Because they're not taxable, they pay us a payment in lieu of taxes, and it's based on the current tax rates, and it's also based on what we actually charge for a fair market value of a property. So the reason why it went down is because the fair market value overall in the city has gone up quite a bit. So what that does is that lowers that tax rate that we have if you look at it on a fair market value basis. So that's why you're seeing that $20,000 reduction there. Increased sick leave conversion budget. We do put money aside every year for our sick leave conversion program, where when people retire, they're able to convert their sick leave to a post-employment health plan and use those dollars to fund premiums in retirement. And of course, as wages increase and salaries increase, we also need to increase the amount of money that we set aside for that program. We had $18,000 increased liability and property insurance premiums. That's pretty standard. And then increased city hall maintenance expenses for $15,000. Any questions so far? I know I've been going through this quite quickly. No? Okay.
She's got one.
Ginger has a question.
This might be a long question, but what counts as transportation spending? Is that both, you said you're trying to include more and more, so is it capital and operating expenses, or?
It is,
Okay.
yes. It's both capital and operating expenses. And then it also includes street lighting expenses,
Okay.
but street lighting expenses have a reduced percentage. And then it also includes a little bit of police expenses as well, because the police do things for the transportation system. They do traffic enforcement, and they do, respond to crashes and things like that. So while we get 16% on transportation spending, by the time it's adjusted, we get about 4% for everything we spend on police.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay, so one of the questions that I had, especially after looking at the alderperson budget and seeing that it was underspent by quite a bit, I had a question: are we significantly underspending our budget overall, and is there money available to be reallocated? So I did take another look at the 2023 financial results, and basically we spent 99% of the 2023 budget. So I'm going to say that there's not a significant amount of money that's there that could be reallocated. The other things are unspent money is an important source of capital project funding, so that money doesn't just disappear, it does get rolled over into fund balance, which we then use for capital projects. And then the other important thing is we really try to not punish good behavior. And if we create a culture where underspent line items are reduced, so say you have a budget of $2,500 for office supplies and you only spend $2,000, so then we come and we say, okay, we're going to now take away that $500. What you can have is a situation where now everyone's in a race to spend money, because otherwise the comptroller, or the mayor, or the city council is going to take it away. So that's the other thing to keep in mind with sort of reallocating unspent or underspent budget dollars. Okay, I was also asked to provide an update on general obligation debt in millions. So you can see the total general obligation debt basically, and I was asked to provide as much history as I had, which goes back to 2023. You can see it was stable for a while, then really between 2027 and 2013, increased pretty dramatically. I started with the city in 2013. I kind of saw what was going on, and I said, we need to figure out something else. So that's actually 2013 where we decided, okay, we're going to tie new borrowing to what we're actually repaying in principal every year, because we can't, the graph can't keep skyrocketing like that. So as you can see, we really then brought it down a little bit. 2019, it hit a low point. And then you can see that we have been creeping back up. And the main reason for that is because even though we've tied new borrowing to the principal that we're repaying, we make some exceptions to that, such as when we do a TIF project, we typically haven't had that compete with the general capital project borrowing. So you have increases there, especially if we give upfront development incentives, that utilizes more of that borrowing. And then, of course, this year, I expect it to go up again, partly because we've got a major subdivision project going on and we've got a major road extension going on in TIF District 9. So that's, if we look at this graph next year, I expect that it'll be actually a pretty significant increase again. It's something to keep an eye on for sure, and it's something that we just have to do the best we can and try to strike the right balance between, we don't want to be in a situation where we're afraid to do anything, because it's going to result in us borrowing money, but at the same time we want to manage our debt responsibly. So that's sort of some of the balance that we have to make in terms of managing our debt. So in terms of the proposed levy, basically, I gave you both numbers. The levy without a referendum would be $19,446,231, with a projected assessed tax rate of $8.45 per thousand. That would be an increase of about 4.5%. Or if the referendum passes, you're looking at a levy of $20,421,231, with a projected assessed tax rate of $8.87 per thousand, which would be about a 9.7% increase in the overall tax rate. And note our tax levy amount isn't actually increasing that much, but because of the personal property buyout, you have basically that tax levy is spread over a smaller tax base. The other thing I wanted to note is that we don't have final numbers from the Department of Revenue yet, and as far as everything is concerned. So the total levy is what's being adopted with our budget, not the actual tax rate. If there's any discrepancy between the two, it's the total amount that we're collecting in taxes is what we're actually adopting. So, and then give you a tax rate history. So the assessed tax rate is basically based on what your actual assessment is by the city assessor. And then I also included an equalized tax rate. That's the tax rate based on fair market value. If you follow, basically if you follow both tax rates, you can see that the assessed tax rate decreased quite a bit with the revaluation that we did, last year and having a larger tax base. And if you look at the equalized tax rate based on fair market value, you can see if there's no referendum, it'd be $7.99 per thousand. If the referendum passes, it'd be $8.39 per thousand, which actually does compare well with 2020, it was $9.01. So, and part of that, though, is because basically the market value of our property has appreciated faster than what our budget has grown and what our tax levy has grown. Finally, and I know this is kind of technical, but a note about the referendum and the expenditure restraint program, we might have to make a small adjustment of about $5,000 to the total budget, just based on keeping compliance with the expenditure restraint program if the referendum passes, because the expenditure restraint program limits the total size of our total general fund budget. And then also, if the referendum doesn't pass, I'm thinking we should really consider ways to maintain this capacity that we have under the expenditure restraint program. Other communities have done this. Basically, you budget extra revenue and extra expenses, even though we don't actually see either of them, but just basically to keep that total budget number a little bit higher so that you keep some flexibility for the future. Yeah. So, okay, so that kind of concludes the first part of the presentation. So any questions or discussion on the 2025 operating budget from anybody?
Any questions from the committee?
I guess I have one more.
Yeah, sure.
Back on slide 29, you talk about the maintenance of effort for police and that there's 3 criteria and we need to meet at least one. Which of those 3, did we meet all 3 of those this year? And I guess that's the first part. Or which of those 3?
Yes, yes.
And then the second part is just given rising costs, do you think it's likely that, how much of our tax levy dollars we spend on police will not only be stagnant, but just keep going up? Even if we maintain the same number of officers and whatnot, so.
Sure. So to answer the first part of your question, this year we met all 3 criteria. So that was good, and that's the way that I'd like to keep it, because it's a pretty big penalty that we want to avoid. And then as far as the questions about, sort of the future and rising, costs, doesn't that, kind of take care of itself? I guess the only things that you have to watch out for are, you can have other factors that have an impact, such as turnover, such as, if you have a year like COVID where you have much reduced overtime usage, that will affect what you're spending on the police department wages and so forth. So in a normal year, if everything happens normally, it shouldn't be an issue. But one of the things that really makes me nervous about it, and actually I had some input on this with the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, and they tried to get this changed, is the maintenance of effort requirement is based on what you actually spend, not on the budget. Okay. And I don't personally like that, because if you do a budget, you can check it for compliance, you can make sure that it meets the maintenance of effort requirements. The league tried to get that changed to say based on the budget, but the legislature was insistent that they wanted it to be based on what you actually spend.
Sure.
And the thing is, what you actually spend can change from year to year.
Sure.
So now that kind of puts us in the situation where now I'm monitoring, usually I'm monitoring budgets to make sure they don't go over budget. Now I have to monitor the police and fire department budgets to make sure that they're spending enough. Which is
kind of counterintuitive, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
All right, any other questions from the committee? Otherwise, I'll open it up to the floor.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Thanks so much for the presentation. I have a few questions, and I'm not sure who's in the overflow room. I'll ask them all, and then folks can speak to all of them.
Remember to identify yourself, please.
Oh, happy to. Thank you. I'm Jackie Guthrie. I'm Alder District 2. Thank you. I wonder if the department heads that are present tonight wouldn't mind speaking to the 1 or 2 biggest wants that ended up not being in the proposed budget, just for context setting. I wonder if someone can speak to, with the proposed operational budget, where we anticipate being with permit processing next high construction season, and then also if someone could speak to, and if not tonight, that's okay, the citation revenue declines, if there's a change in practice or processes that we should know about. Those are my questions. Thank you.
All right. I think maybe what would be best if we could give people a chance to, I don't know if any of the directors are comfortable speaking that off the cuff this evening, if you want to speak to it? Oh.
Mine's real easy.
All right.
So as it pertains to the operating budget, where'd you go? There you are. You saw there were some minor increases because of wages, nothing in the operational line items for the levied part of my department increase. That was all zero. So wages was it. If you're asking also about capital, is that what you're, oh, you weren't, okay. Good.
No, by giving the COLA essentially, and giving 0.0% operational.
Can you go to the lectern,
Yes,
please?
thanks. By honoring this approach to giving the full COLA, but a 0.0% operational increase year after year, I'm wondering what, if anything, are we losing in your ability to provide services to our community?
Gotcha. Okay. My answer is going to be a little different than some others, I bet. The city tax levy component of transit would be the most significant there, but it's still relatively, I mean, it's not small, but it's not our whole budget. So it does kind of get tighter and tighter, and we do have city and county contributing factors locally there, but then state and federal also. So I mean, I can't say that there was anything in transit this year that was really significant that we had to forego because of the operational budget being flat. Oh, I thought you were gonna say.
Not that bad.
That's it. Yeah. The thing we struggle with most there is fuel, stuff like that. But you saw that we actually did get the increases because they were worked in for the things that are non-discretionary. Wages, healthcare, pension, stuff like that. Yeah.
Are there any other directors that would like to speak to that this evening?
Good evening, everyone. To answer your question, I think it's more or less what I would think most would otherwise say is the cost of all of our other items go up as well. So repairing vehicles, the cost to repair those vehicles up, oil filters, gaskets, whatever it is, spark plugs, spark wires, they all go up in price. And when we're set with that set budget from year after year, it just gets tighter and tighter to do that. Same thing with our general construction budget. I had to take from that to create a position earlier. So without getting, additional amounts to add to that, it reduces what we can otherwise do. So it just becomes more of a task to try to balance everything across there to make sure that we're still in the black at the end of the year. So it's, one of those things that probably the rest of the directors too will probably stress a little bit more about than we wish we had to, but it is just the reality of life.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I would just add in my department, the contracted things are the things that we can't control. So, we have things like portable toilets that we use for companies to the different vendors that we might buy supplies from wood chips to, items that we use for playgrounds. And there's a whole variety of things that we do purchase. The hard thing there is that we can't really negotiate those prices. And as they increase with other things, we certainly have to get creative. I will say it's a difficult decision as a director or discussion, because I can tell you that, at least in my department, the employees are super sensitive and super appreciative of the approach that the council has taken in the past with the COLAs in comparison to some of our peers. So I do believe that some of the creativity that we get from my department in terms of the employees saying, hey, can we do this in-house versus contracting, and some of the things, at least I've noticed a lot of our employees are pretty proactive on that approach, because they know that the alternative would be less wage increases, COLA could be less to be able to keep up with operations. So I think it's a delicate balance. My department, a little smaller budget than some of the others. Usually when we have a big initiative, even in this budget, the comptroller's offered some different suggestions or things that we can work around. So I think it's difficult to reverse course necessarily. And I'm not saying that's what you're advocating for. I'm just saying I know the employees have been very vocal, at least in my department, saying they really appreciated that approach by the Finance Committee and Council in the past. So.
All right. Thank you.
I guess I'm going to echo what some of the other department or directors have already discussed, but I think if you want to look at the two biggest things in the fire department that have consistently been a problem now with a 0% increase in our operational budget over the last 5 years is our general fire equipment. Again, the cost of doing business, everything continues to go up. So those pieces of equipment and supplies that we're using on a day-to-day basis on those fire scenes are just getting old or worn out, and there's a cost to replacing those. And without those line items increasing, that's one of our bigger struggles. The second thing is our educational aspects. So making sure that our employees are educated educated and continuing their education. Some of those things are within the line item budget, or within the budget that are line items that when we don't get those increases to send those individuals out for continuing education, that can become a problem in the future as well, because we want to make sure we stay at the tip of the spear and we're educating our employees to making sure we're providing the best possible product when we go out there and serve the community.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the public? Oh.
With being fairly new to the department, I guess I probably can't provide you an answer right at this moment, but if that is okay, I can get you more information and send it to you via email as well as the rest of the committee. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, thanks. All right, it seems like that's it. Corey, we're ready to go on to
Sure,
our
yeah.
next.
Move on to the next part, which is looking to the future, 2026 and beyond. And I guess somebody's going to have to advance.
I got it.
You got it? Okay. Thanks, Mark. So, kind of, are we, because we did have a good budget this year in terms of, actually finally able to add that new police officer position. So are we at the end of the storm or the eye of the hurricane? So basically, included a picture of a hurricane there. Another one that's actually inside the eye of a hurricane from an airplane. And basically what I would tell you is, unfortunately, I think we're kind of in the eye of the hurricane as opposed to the end of the end of the storm. And the reason why is because there's a long-term imbalance between revenues and expenses, between our what we get in net new construction, which if I average the past 2 years, 1.64% is the average, for the past 2 years. And then if we look at 3% inflation, 2.5% or 3% COLA, it doesn't quite balance. You have expenses that go up faster than revenues. I specifically made the expense budget and font larger to kind of emphasize that point, that I believe that that's sort of the challenge that we have. So if I get to the next slide. So if I project right now the sources and uses for 2026, and keep in mind this is extremely preliminary, it could change considerably. I already talked about state aid programs that can go up or down $100,000 in a year. But if I look at what I think for sure we're probably going to have in revenues, I'd say, well, we'll probably have net new construction and, about $213,000 there. I expect transportation aid to continue to increase because we are continuing to spend more money on transportation. So, that's another $120,000. And then increased shared revenue. If sales tax collections continue to go up, I expect that we'll continue to see an increase in shared revenue of maybe about $100,000. But then when I total up the expenses, where we've got the salary pay plan COLA, I went with 2.75, gets you about $230,000. Police union wage increases, if they have a normal year, $134,000. Health insurance increases or changes, I went with a 4% premium increase, $109,000. That wage progression for seniority, which I think is going to be an issue because we have had a lot of turnover and we have a lot of younger employees that have a long ways to go in terms of wage progression. Figured another $100,000 there. And then fire union wage increases about 60-some thousand. You're looking at projected sources of $435,000, projected uses of $639,000. So a 2026 deficit of about $200,000 as far as what we're looking, and again, extremely preliminarily, but that's just kind of my first look at it. That's what I would, consider that we would probably expect for 2026 at this point. So now, note, a lot can change. We've got the salary progression that increases costs versus savings from turnover. We've got health insurance rate and enrollment changes that can be very, significant. State aid changes that can go either up or down. So there's a lot of wild cards yet. Wanted to talk about, because whenever we talk about challenges, sometimes there's an immediate assumption that the city is doing something wrong, that we have challenges with our budget or that our budgets aren't perfect. So I took notice that last month, there were 7 cities in Dane County that stood shoulder to shoulder at a press conference to talk about their challenges. You've got City of Madison, City of Fitchburg, and City of Monona, and City of Middleton, so 4 out of the 7 that are going to referendum next month. You've got the City of Sun Prairie. They just implemented a $30 vehicle registration fee known as a wheel tax. They plan to go to referendum in the future, either 2025 or 2026. You've got the City of Stoughton that plans to go to referendum in the future. And you've got the City of Verona, which is a small community with a massive taxpayer. They've got Epic Systems there. It's a $1.4 billion taxpayer. So they're kind of an outlier in terms of they've basically won the development lottery. So they're the only ones that that aren't, in some significant challenge that I can see. So as far as statewide municipal levy limit referenda in the past 2 years, November of 2022 to April of 2024, 65 total referenda, 38 passed, 58% passage rate. So again, we're not the first community to go to a referendum. Certainly won't be the last. I think that that's something that we're going to continue to see. And a little bit closer to home, City of Marshfield, they tend to have just a tougher time and, have another difficult budget. They're actually leaving positions unfilled for 2025, including the position of Community Development Director, a streets operator, and a clerk's office position. They're also reducing their library hours. They're doing a 1% cost of living adjustment for the employees. And they're also reducing employee HSA contributions. They're also still down 2 firefighter paramedics from previous budgets. Now, I want to note this is just what's been proposed so far. They're still working through all these issues, but certainly they're having a very different budget discussion than what we're having tonight. So I think that that's important to understand that, certainly when we talk about challenges or that things aren't perfect, we're certainly not alone in that. So what's the problem? Basically, the problem is really 2 things. It's unreasonably restrictive levy limits. They're based on net new construction. There's no allowance at all for inflation. We've got net new construction adjustments ranging from 1% to 2%, which just isn't enough to account for inflation. And then also limited state aid. We did have some recent increases, but let's not forget that that was after years of stagnation and reductions. Now, I was on a virtual conference a couple months ago, and there was somebody from Texas who was speaking about budgeting, and he said, in Texas we have to keep in mind that we have levy limits and we have to work within those. And I thought, well, what does Texas have for levy limits? Because that's not exactly a big, I don't perceive it as a big tax and spend kind of a state. So I thought, what do their levy limits look like? They got a 3.5% allowance for inflation. Plus, on top of that, they get an adjustment for net new construction. So, if we were in Texas, rather than having a 1.95% levy limit, we'd have a 5.45% levy limit. And it makes a lot of sense because you have cost pressures from both inflation and from the growth of your community. So basically, if we were a municipality in Texas, this presentation would be over already because we'd have no problem. Because there would be no issue with making that kind of a levy limit work. Wisconsin levy limits used to be more flexible. It used to give you either 3% for inflation or net new construction, whichever was higher. You at least got that 3% for inflation. It doesn't allow you to maybe do a lot of extra things, but it's something that you can work with. But the current levy limits are just very difficult. The other thing that I'll point out about Texas is homeowners are also protected by a limit on how much an assessment can increase in a given year. And boy, would most of our residents love a law like that. Many states have this, Wisconsin does not. And I think that really creates some tension that, we're in a position where we don't really have a lot of revenue necessarily. We don't have a lot of flexibility with the levy, but at the same time, our homeowners are really sitting here unprotected from big swings in assessment, big changes in market value. And so, they might not be so understanding when we say that we need more money for something, or if we need to go to referendum again. So, and quite frankly, if I had to choose as a homeowner myself, I'd much rather have an assessment limit than a levy limit, because I think market values of properties are much more volatile than local government budgets. So, is this conversation new? No. We had it 2 years ago. We looked at various options. And then in the middle of that discussion, there was a talk of a shared revenue increase that we were hearing in a bipartisan fashion. And we kind of postponed that discussion because the shared revenue increase became more and more likely. And then what we did is we made a very good decision to roll over our levy capacity from the 2024 budget to the 2025 budget, so that shared revenue increase got us through 2 budget years. But now as we look to the future, we're not going to have that rollover going into 2026. So we have to at least maybe start thinking about our options. We don't have to decide anything yet, but I think it's good to keep the options in the back of our minds. So the 3 options that we looked at last time, one was a transportation utility. There was legal uncertainty when we looked at this before. Unfortunately, the Wisconsin Supreme Court has now ruled that these are illegal. Legal Wisconsin municipalities have said they're illegal for now, so which is disappointing, because that could have been a really good option. A referendum. We could do that if we wish to do this for the 2026 budget. We need to decide in January, as it would have to be an April election since there are no fall elections in 2025. I'm not going to make the decision for you, but my personal opinion is that it's just way too soon after the fire department referendum to go to referendum again. So then that leaves us with sort of the third and final option, which is the vehicle registration fee, also known as a wheel tax. A $10 registration fee would equal approximately $200,000 in revenue for the city. Want to note we are allowed to do this even though Portage County already has a vehicle registration fee. We must use it for transportation-related expenses, but it could be either capital or operating, and the point would be to use it for operating expenses. Now, as far as municipalities, are there any municipalities with both a county and municipal vehicle registration fee? Yes, there are 5. Eau Claire, Madison, Milwaukee, Village of Oregon, and Newly, Sun Prairie. So that is an option. I don't think it's something that we have to decide right now today, but I wanted to get it sort of on the table, sooner rather than later. I think it's important that we, rather than just thinking about today and thinking about this budget, that we're also thinking about future budgets, future options, and sort of what we're going to do. So with that, any questions, discussion on future budgets, challenges, and options?
No, but Corey, I do appreciate you taking a look at what the future, the very near future may be bringing, and some of the things that we're going to have to be considering in the very near future. So that's helpful. Anyone on the committee, any comments, questions, concerns?
Lots of concerns.
Lots of, yeah, no kidding. How about from the audience? From the public? All right. Thank you very much for all of your hard work. Thank you also for the rest of the staff. I know Carrie's been very helpful for 12, and I'm still not looking forward to the day we end up losing her. So,
you and me both.
Yes. So, thank you for all of your hard work this year and in years past. And that ends our agenda. Our agenda is exhausted, and we will adjourn at 7:05.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.